As we try and understand the effect of IT on internal control, let's first look at the organization of personnel in the IT department. So we're looking at two teams here, and the first one is the systems development team. Now this is the team which is in charge of the systems development life cycle that we learned here. So this was planning, analysis, design, development, testing, implementation and maintenance of IT systems. So the systems development team includes a systems analyst who designs the IT system using systems flowchart and program specifications for application programmers. Now application programmers, they write, test and debug programs that will be used in the IT system. And then you also have a database administrator who plans and administers the database to ensure that only appropriate employees have access to the information on the database. Now the second team we are looking at is the data processing team. So you have a data entry clerk, or rather many data entry clerks who convert data into computer readable form. And then you have computer operator or operators who run the program on the computer. Then you got librarians who have custody of the computer programs, of the master files, transaction files, records and documentation. And then you have the control group who come in periodically and do review and test of input procedures, who monitor the processing and then take charge of reviewing and distributing the output. So as you can understand here, we have a lot of people working in our IT department. Let's see what part of internal controls are they all in charge of. So the systems development team, we could say, is in charge of authorization. So they are the ones which create the IT system. Then you have the data entry clerk and the computer operator. They are doing the record keeping function. The librarian, he's got custody. And you have the control group who come in periodically and do comparisons, reviews. So guys, once again, we are looking at the systems development team doing authorization. We are having the data entry clerk and the computer operator in charge of record keeping function, librarian in charge of the custody function, control group in charge of the comparison function. And because we have different employees in charge of these functions, we have also ensured proper segregation of duties. So that's your arcs in internal control. Get to page 29. And towards the bottom of the page, let's draw out the segregation of duties that we saw could improve internal controls in IT environments. So the boss here is an IT manager who could have two teams working under him, systems development team and a data processing team. Now the data processing team could include data entry clerks, computer operators, librarian and control group. Now trying to fit in the arcs that we learned as control activities under internal controls, the systems development team, they are responsible for A of arcs or authorization. Put a bracket around data entry clerk and computer operator, R. They take care of the recording. The librarian, the first C, so the librarian, he's got custody. And the control group, the second C, they take care of comparison. So you got ARCC, the S of arcs, that's segregation of duties. So draw lines between A, R, C and C. Now let's look at important internal controls in IT environments. So we're looking at general controls and application controls. So general controls are controls which relate to overall integrity of the IT system. Application controls, they relate to individual programs and users of the system. So under general control, we are first looking at personnel policies, which say that we need to have a team take care of authorization, record keeping, custody, comparison, and make sure that all these duties are segregated. And that is what we saw when we looked at the personnel in the IT department, where we segregated all these duties. Moving on, we're looking at file security, where we want to have access controls, both physical access as well as electronic access. It's important to have passwords, and you might also want to have different levels of password authority. Let's say some of the employees in the firm may receive only read-only access to a database. They can't edit anything there. Now, talking about passwords, someone once said, passwords, they are like underwear. You should change them pretty often. You should not leave them out for others to see, and you should not share them. So if you remember these tricks, you would know how to maintain your file securities and access controls. Then we're looking at contingency planning. Now here you want to have backups for your data, for your information. You could go in for a grandfather, father, son retention system. Now the way that works is, let us say we're looking at 3 periods, period 1, period 2 and period 3. So we have had backups for all these 3 periods, where period 1 becomes the grandfather, period 2 is the father, period 3 is the son. Now when you want to have backup for period 4, you let the grandfather die. That means period 1 data is deleted. Period 2 data becomes the grandfather. Period 3 data becomes the father. And period 4 data becomes the son now. Think about it. Earlier you had period 1, 2 and 3. Now period 2, that's become the grandfather. Period 3 has become the father. Period 4 is the new son now. Let's say you also have period 5 to take a backup for. What you do is you let period 2 die. Period 3 now becomes the grandfather. Period 4, who was the son, becomes the father. And period 5 is the new son. So that is how you do a grandfather, father, son retention for backups. Now you could also use a checkpoint system. So what happens here is, at certain checkpoints, the system takes a backup. And if a problem occurs, the system would restart from the last checkpoint. Then we also need to be prepared for disaster recoveries. So what if a disaster or a natural calamity occurs? What happens to the IT systems? So we could have a hot site. This means that we have an alternative site where we could move our people, which is ready with all the hardware and the software. Now, if you have a warm site, that means yes, you have the site, you have the hardware ready, but the software is not totally ready. It will take you some time to get it up and running. Now, if it's a cold site, that means you just have the site. You're yet to put in the hardware and software. So, if you have a hot site, you're properly ready for any disasters. Warm site will take you some time. Cold site will take you a little more time. Now, you might also want to have a mirrored web server, which is an off-site server taking a backup of all your data, all your information. Now, under general controls, we also have hardware controls, where you could do a parity check. Basically, you have a dummy bit which works as a parity bit and makes sure that your systems, your hardware is working effectively and efficiently. You could do an echo check. So let us say you're transmitting data from system 1 to system 2. Now, after data goes into system 2, you have system 2 echo back the data to system 1. And system 1 would review it. So the person sitting here, he would review that what he's received from system 2, was it what it actually sent? So that becomes an echo check. So the data comes back so that the sender can check it if it is exactly what he had intended to send. And then as part of general controls, you also want to have documentation for any new programs and for any alterations to existing programs. Look at page 28. So the information system controls, they consist of, put a box around, general controls. So these are controls related to the computer, technology or the IT function. They include organizational, personnel and operations controls, system development controls, network, hardware and facility controls, backup and disaster recovery controls. They also include accounting controls. Next we got, put a box around, application controls, which are designed to prevent, detect and correct errors and irregularities in transactions that are processed by accounting systems. Now they include input controls, processing controls and output controls. On page 29, highlight organizational, personnel and operations control. And a major one here is underline segregation of duties and functions. Right there, ARCC, authorization, recording, custody, comparison and draw lines between them, segregation of duties. So it's important that you have proper segregation of duties in IT environments to ensure proper IT controls. Underline vacation rule. So creating an interruption in an individual's system access by requiring vacation time, that could help prevent that person from conducting and covering up a fraud scheme, because that scheme would get unearthed when the person is on vacation. It's important to prevent unauthorized access to data and programs by underline assigning user profiles, passwords and other security features to control access privileges, and implementing monitoring features to track usage and file activity. Knowledge of employees' habits, generally by observing employee behavior and recognizing unusual expenditures, could be a good help. Next, highlight system controls. So here our focus is on underline written procedures and manuals. So ensuring an effective systems development process is a key systems control. Underline systems development life cycle, where we have the project definition phase, where you state the objectives and you do a feasibility and investigative study. And then you have a project initiation phase when the systems start building up. Now, the organization and documentation of the process helps to ensure that appropriate controls are incorporated into the system. In addition, the design, programming, testing and management functions of the system should be separated so that no one individual is able to insert a malicious code of functions with a fraudulent intent. On page 30, highlight hardware and facility controls. So here we're looking at underline physical controls. So it could include door locks and security systems to guard against unauthorized access. The data center needs to have effective environmental controls, fire protection and safeguards against flooding and other natural disasters, as well as a backup power supply and protection against electrical spikes. The system itself needs to be designed to handle peak processing volumes without unacceptable slowdowns. Next, highlight network controls and underline to protect the organization's networks and data. So what could help here is underline data encryption, which is converting data so that it can only be read by those with the correct decryption key. You could have a routing verification and message acknowledgement. You might need underline virus protection. Underline firewalls. So firewalls are a combination of hardware and software to prevent unauthorized access to the corporate network from outside the organization or to segment the network and to prevent unauthorized access to specific systems within the organization. We want to have intrusion detection systems which detect unauthorized access or actions within the network. On page 31, we're looking at backup and disaster recovery controls. Highlight backup policies and procedures which ensure that lost data can be recovered. Now, most policies call for copying all files on the network daily or on other specified intervals and storing the backup data at an off-site location. Many firms institute a procedure called grandfather father son method. Now, with this method, the most recent 3 generation, let's say the last 3 days of backup files are secured at all times. Highlight disaster recovery policies and procedures. These are also called business continuance plans, which are designed to enable the firm to carry on business in the event that an emergency, such as a natural disaster, disrupts normal function. Now, there could be highlight specific backup sites for alternate computer processing. Now, these could be a hot site, a warm site, or a cold site. Underline hot site, where you have a site plus hardware plus software. So basically the alternative site that's ready in case of an emergency. Underline warm site, where you have site plus hardware. So a warm site in case of an emergency can be made operational within a short time frame. Underline cold site, and right there, site only. So on a cold site, the site is ready, but you would have some effort before it could start up and running in case of an emergency. So these are disaster recovery backup sites that a firm should have as part of its IT controls. Now we're looking at application controls, which are specific program controls. Let's start with input controls. Now, a lot of times you want to verify data as it is being entered. So you could do a field check, limit test, validity check, or a check digit. Data as it is being entered. So in a field check, you want to validate whether the format of the input or the length of the input is okay. Let's say if the input is a social security number, you might want to do a field check to ensure that only digits are entered, not letters. You could use a limit check to ensure that only 9 characters are accepted. The moment you enter 10 characters, the system won't accept because it's beyond the limit. If you enter 8, again, it's below the limit, won't accept. So that's a limit test. You could do a validity test where you match the input to a pre-existing acceptable list. For example, let's say it's a list of US states, and instead of NY for New York, you enter NU. Doesn't accept because there is no state called NU. Validity check. You could have check digits. Now, I'll give you a very simple example of a check digit. Let's say we have numbers 6 and 4, 64. 6 plus 4 gives you 10. So how about we have an alphabet J, which is 6 plus 4. So this becomes the check digit. So for example, you have 3 and 1. That's 3 plus 1 is 4. So the fourth alphabet is A, B, C, and D. So that will be D here. If you have 5 and 2, you're looking at the 7th alphabet. So you have A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So J, D, G, here these are check digits. So this is pretty simple. You generally have more complex formulas for check digits. Then you could do edit checks. So generally this is done in batch processing environments where all the information is checked before it is inputted by the data entry clerk. Then you could do control totals. And to understand control totals, let's look at an example that we have on your book. So it says, assume that the checks written during a particular day are being entered into a checkbook program and that data input clerk is working from the following sheet to make the entries. So let me put that on the space that we have here. So you got check number, you got the name of the pay, you got the amount dollars, and you have the account code. So check number 1007, pay is Varun, it's $700, account code 707. Check number 1008, payable to Meenakshi, amount is $6,000, account code is 121. Check number 1009, payable to Miles, amount is $3,000, account code 914. So the total amount is $9,700. Now here, what's the record count? How many rows, how many records? 1, 2, 3. So record count is 3. What's the financial total? That's $700 plus $6,000 plus $3,000, $9,700. Now apart from this, we have a lot of other information. We got check number. How about we do a total of these check numbers calculates to 3024. Does this number make any sense? No, but it could still serve as a hash total just to check whether the data entry clerk entered the right check numbers. You could also do a sum for account code. So account code total will be 1742. So that's another hash total. So it doesn't make sense, yes, but it could still prove to be a good input control. Now, apart from input controls, we could also have processing controls, where we're starting with systems and software documentation so that you can make sure that the processing programs are complete and thorough. You could have error testing compilers to make sure that there are no programming language errors. User acceptance testing. Basically, you want to make sure that the application processing is meeting the user requirements. Test data. You want to expose the processing to one sample of each type of exception that you think you would be facing during the use of the program. System testing, where you're testing the integration of the system. So these are all processing controls that you could do to specific programs. Output controls, here you want to make sure that the processed results, they are valid, and you want to monitor the distribution and use of output. So you do a manual user testing to check if the output is fine. You might want to look at the distribution list before the output gets distributed out to make sure it's only distributed out to authorized people, to people who should be receiving this output. And if it's sensitive information, better use shredders. On page 32, we are looking at highlight input controls as part of application controls. Now, input controls is about verification of data as it is being entered. Let's draw up a good example of control totals, which are a mix of input and processing controls. So do 3 columns there, check number, account code, and amount. So check number 1007, account code 707, amount $700. Check number 1008, account code 121, and amount $6,000. Check number 1009, account code 914, and amount $3,000. Now do totals for all the columns. For check number, the total is 3024. For account code 1742. And the amount total, that's right, $9,700. Now the totals for check number and account code, they really do not make a lot of sense. But as part of controls, they do serve as right hash totals. So the hash total which has been inputted is different from what should have been inputted. That's a flag. Things need to be taken care of. Now for amount, the total $9,700, that's a relevant total, and that's what we call right financial total. Put a bracket around the information that we have for all the three checks, right? Number of records equals 3. So this one is right record count. So within control totals, you got record count, you got financial total, a relevant sum, and you got hash totals. On page 33, you got highlight processing controls, which underline address the system's manipulation of data after it is input. Now the processing controls are often interdependent with input controls and output controls. And you got a lot of processing controls in here that you can read on your own. Turn to page 34. We'll be looking at highlight output controls. Underline controls for validating processing results. And you would also want to have underline controls regulating distribution of output, whether it's in printed or electronic form.